I don't know if you've heard about this thing called a tulpa, but it's basically when you have like an imaginary friend in your head that you talk to and you can have conversations with, but this imaginary friend is like fully sentient. It's fully conscious and like acts by itself inside your mind. So a tulpa is not like the imaginary friend you had when you were fucking 3 years old. It's like an advanced version of an imaginary friend that like fully grown adults are creating and late teenagers are creating in their mind. It's like a person in their mind that they can speak to, and that person is sentient and speaks back to them as if they are another person. And there's a whole group of people like on the internet which talk about tulpas and like creating these fucking like imaginary friends. They're kind of like imaginary friends. I don't know if the people making them would see it like that, but it's kind of what it is. And this kind of sounds crazy. This kind of sounds fucking schizo, right? That fully grown adults are creating these sentient imaginary friends. It's kind of like you're just talking to yourself, but it's actually not as weird as you may think, because I've kind of talked about this before. There's a thing that happens with writers, like people who write books and they spend a lot of time writing. They a lot of the times have a thing called the illusion of independent agency. And the illusion of independent agency for writers is when they put so much focus on the character they're writing about, and they're fully immersed in the book they're writing, that it seems the characters they write about start kind of acting by themselves, and they can lose control of the characters they're writing. So, and actually, that's not even that fucking weird. In this study they did, that happens to like 90% of writers. Over 90% of writers say they start kind of losing control of their characters after like 30,000 words or some shit. So it's not as weird as you may think, and these people that are creating these tulpas are kind of just doing what these writers are doing, but in a more like forced manual way. And I actually remember like searching up about tulpas and reading more about this when I was like 13, because I was lonely as fuck. And I was like, you know what, I may as well just create an imaginary friend in my head that can talk to me. That's what I was thinking when I was 13. So I went on the tulpa Reddit, and right now that Reddit actually that subreddit has like under 50,000 people in it. So there's actually quite a few people making these like imaginary friends in their head. So I remember going on that subreddit when I was 13, and the first like post I saw on the subreddit was like, just had sex with my tulpa here. And then it was just a photo of like an empty road. It was just a photo of an empty road or some shit. And the title was like, just had sex with my tulpa here or something. And so they're just talking about this person in their head. And I thought that was kind of funny. But yeah, I remember going on the tulpa subreddit and looking like, how do I create a tulpa? Because I was thinking, I'm just going to create an imaginary friend that I can talk to, and they'll be sick as fuck. There'll always be someone in my head, and they'll speak by themselves. It's kind of like a dream character, a person in your dreams. When you're in a normal dream or in a lucid dream, you can kind of talk with the dream character and you have no idea what they're going to say next, because it's kind of using a part of your brain that you don't have access to while you're in the dream. So I assume a tulpa is kind of like that, and it's kind of like you're speaking to yourself in a way, but since you've been like trying to make the tulpa so much, you're kind of speaking to yourself, but it has the illusion that you're speaking to another person. And that kind of links in with the methods that I found when I was 13 on the subreddit, because a lot of the methods to creating these tulpas are kind of like talking to yourself at first, like it's what they call parroting, kind of talking to this tulpa or like imaginary friend you create in your head, and then you talk back as if you're that tulpa that you're talking to in your head, but you kind of pretend that they're talking by themselves. And at first you kind of see, like, it kind of feels like you're a retard because you're kind of just talking to yourself in your head, right? But after a while of really, really forcing this and spending like 30 hours talking back to yourself and pretending you're talking to another person, it's like the tulpa should start speaking by itself, right? I guess it's the kind of same thing with the illusion of independent agency for writers. It's like you talk to this character so much, or you embody this character so much, that you're actually still just talking to yourself. But right now, it's so automatic when you do it that it has the illusion of being a different person, if that kind of makes sense. I don't know if that makes sense. And honestly, I'm retarded. I probably don't know how this shit fully works. But yeah, I just remember when I was 13 trying to make a tulpa because I wanted a friend. So I kind of just started fucking talking to myself, and I gave up after 3 days because I just felt like a fucking idiot. Because I just sat there for like 1 hour just talking to myself in my head, and I was like, when is he gonna start talking by himself? And he never did. So I just felt like a retard and kind of gave it up. And honestly, now I probably wouldn't even try and even get into that tulpa shit. I'm fucking delusional now. I feel like I could probably create a tulpa in like 1 day if I tried now, and then I would like lose control of it, and it would be this like bad shit that I'll probably regret. And speaking of that, it's funny because these people in the tulpa subreddit talk about this thing called possession, and these guys who create tulpas claim that they can allow their imaginary friend to possess their body with their consent, of course, with their consent. Their tulpa can possess their body and control their body by themselves. So like they lose control of their body, and their imaginary friend, this other part of their brain, fucking like possesses them. If you have a tulpa or something, let me know if I'm just yapping and this sounds retarded, because once again, I haven't gone like a lot into depth on this tulpa shit. I just thought it was interesting, and I thought this whole tulpa thing and the imaginary friend thing was so interesting that I kind of started reading on the history about it and where the tulpa thing originated. And I was reading that in like ancient Tibet, these Tibetan monks kind of did something that was similar to making a tulpa, like an imaginary friend, except it wasn't really like creating a fucking imaginary friend from an anime or something like these guys on Reddit seem to be doing. The ancient Tibetan monks were more doing, it was more like related to their gods or their deities and stuff like that. And I think it was quite different from what people are doing now with tulpas. Honestly, I started reading a lot about it and I didn't understand fucking anything about it at all. It had all these like Buddhist terms and shit, and it really honestly made no sense to me. So if you're into Buddhism or you know a fucking Buddhist, they will probably know more about what these ancient Tibetans were doing. But I was reading about this woman actually who kind of made the idea of a tulpa in like the West really popular. What was her name? I have it, fuck, my voice is cracked. I had her name written down somewhere here. Alexandra David Neal. Okay, yeah. This is her name. I don't know if you've heard about this woman, Alexandra David Neal. She traveled around Tibet for years and years, and there was this city in Tibet in the 1920s that foreigners weren't allowed in. I don't know what the name of it was. I think it was Lhasa. 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 I don't know how to pronounce that. It was like a city for Tibetans, and foreigners weren't allowed in the city. But this woman, Alexandra David Neal, who was a Belgian, I'm pretty sure, she fucking snuck into this forbidden city in the 1920s. So she wasn't allowed in the city because she was a foreigner, but she like dressed up as a pilgrim or some shit. Hopefully you're like following along with what I'm saying right now. There was this forbidden city in Tibet, and this foreigner snuck into the city because she wanted to learn more about what the Tibetan monks and shit were doing. And this kind of links in with the tulpa thing. Just hear me out. So she snuck into this city, and soon after this, she started creating her own tulpa. And her tulpa was some fat monk. It was like a fat monk who was like really happy and shit. And apparently this Belgian woman who snuck into this city, she spent months like visualizing this fat monk in her head, and she spent months meditating and creating this tulpa, right? And she said after a while she started seeing this fat monk around her without even having to visualize the monk, without even having to imagine him and force her brain to see the monk. She said she just started seeing the fucking fat monk like around her, and she even felt it like brush against her before, which is another thing that Tulpa people on Reddit talk about, is like with enough fucking like force and visualization, they can feel their tulpas. They can like fuck their tulpas, bro, and shit like that. So this woman in Tibet was making this tulpa of a fat fucking monk, and she said she started seeing it. But one time they were like in a tent, and she saw the fat monk, she saw her tulpa, but she said that he looked like lean, like he had lost weight or some shit. She said that he looked like he lost weight, and that he looked like harder and leaner and like more stern or some shit. And then after this weird stuff started happening, and she said she lost control of the tulpa. She lost control of this fat monk she created in her own mind, but he kind of took on a life of his own, and he kind of became sentient and autonomous. And she fucking lost control of the fat monk, bro. And then she said she was like scared and concerned that she lost control of this tulpa that was acting on its own. So she spent 6 months trying to destroy the tulpa. She eventually destroyed it, but she said she spent 6 months like trying to convince herself to stop believing in it or something like that, and that destroyed the tulpa. I don't know, I just thought that was interesting. Once again, it's just a whole yap session. I'm talking about like imaginary friends and shit, but I do find that really interesting actually, because I think Stanford did a study on tulpas as well. I'm not sure if they've released their findings yet, but I know they've been doing some MRI scans of people who claim to have tulpas. So if they kind of release their research on that, that may be interesting to look at. And I think it's interesting as well because the tulpa thing for me, it's like, if you think about tulpas, like imaginary friends that are fucking conscious, it's kind of similar to dream characters in a dream, right? Like when you're in a dream, and you'll know this if you have a lucid dream, or when you have a lucid dream, if you've ever had one, like the dream characters, you don't know what they're gonna say next. I talk about this a lot. They'll just like start yapping some random shit that you have no control over. So the tulpa thing, I guess, is just kind of like you having a dream character that you can't control, but while you're awake kind of thing. I just find that interesting as fuck. I don't know, like I don't know if you're still listening to me right now, because this is just a weird yap session I've been talking about, but I don't know. Tell me what you think of that, and dislike the video, and leave me a mean comment and unsubscribe from me. I love you.